Welcome back. Today we are unpacking the explosive and ongoing feud between Very Dark Man and Sowore, which has recently hijacked the criminal case against Bill Lord. If this isn't about oppression, Very Dark Man is correct. Sowore is hijacking this situation purely to settle a personal vendetta. He has no interest in the facts. This deep-seated grudge goes back to when Very Dark Man independently investigated and publicly exposed Sowore's platform. Furthermore, because Very Dark Man has a mind of his own and refused to be controlled as one of Sowore's political pawns, Sowore for palling. Now, despite B-Lord facing legitimate documented charges for cybercrime, forgery, and impersonation, Sowore is allegedly ignoring the rule of law and crying oppression just to get back at the man who ruined his narrative. So, is Sowore actually fighting for justice, or is this just a desperate attempt at revenge because Very Dark Man dared to say no to him? Let's break down the official court charges and uncover the real story.
Legal systems are built on rigorous procedure, statutory definitions, and objective evidence. But when high-profile cases collide with the internet, those rigid structures are often battered by an avalanche of digital noise and subjective public outrage. We can see this conflict clearly in a recent cybercrime case. A private complainant filed severe criminal charges involving digital fraud against a defendant, resulting in a formal state arrest and a scheduled court appearance. Before the facts could be presented in court, a prominent digital media publisher intervened. This publisher used their platform to broadcast the defendant's arrest as an orchestrated political conspiracy. They immediately weaponized the word oppression, pushing a narrative that the standard police procedure and the resulting judicial decisions were actually acts of targeted harassment against the defendant. To understand what actually happened, we have to strip away the media's incendiary claims and cross-reference them directly against the factual court records and statutory law. In digital disputes involving high-profile personalities, understanding the dry, technical mechanics of the legal system is the only reliable defense against bad faith journalistic manipulation. To see why this incident triggered a state arrest, we need to examine the specific legal framework governing the charges. This explains what elevates an internet dispute into a major criminal felony. This visual reconstruction of the charge sheet outlines the exact allegations. Count 1 focuses on fraud, specifically alleging the defendant fraudulently approved a proprietary digital application, deceiving users into believing it was legitimate. The subsequent counts escalate the severity. Count 2 introduces charges of impersonation to defraud the public. Count 3 involves the deliberate forgery of a flight ticket, used to manipulate event attendance and extract money under false pretenses. This diagram tracks Chapter 22B of the Cybercrimes Act, the specific statute dictating the consequences for these actions. The law clearly states that fraudulent impersonation to gain an advantage carries a strict penalty, up to 5 years imprisonment, a 7 million naira fine, or both. When you add the forgery charge regarding the flight tickets, the mathematics of the sentencing escalate aggressively. Under the law, forgery is a severe crime that pushes the potential prison term into the 7 to 14-year range. The media publisher actively downplayed these statutes, telling the public this was merely a trivial civil disagreement over trademarks. The legal documentation places it firmly under state prosecution for felony cybercrime. Because it is a state-level criminal prosecution, the private complainant's lawyers do not lead the case. Instead, they operate under a watching brief, a legal status where they observe the proceedings to protect their client's interests, while the police act as the primary prosecutor. Framing this specific set of felony charges as a minor civil dispute requires a deliberate obfuscation of objective law, designed entirely to minimize the defendant's culpability in the public eye. The publisher's most aggressive claim was that the judge acted illegally by remanding the defendant to a correctional center. They immediately branded this as state oppression. This timeline maps the actual sequence of the police investigation. It begins well before the arrest, marking multiple official police invitations issued to the defendant. The defendant systematically ignored these summons. A refusal to honor police summons forces law enforcement to escalate. Officers had to travel across state lines to Anambra to apprehend the defendant and transport him back to the legal jurisdiction, legally classifying him as a flight risk. When the police presented the defendant for his first court appearance, a secondary complication arose. The defendant arrived without securing his defense counsel. In criminal proceedings, a judge operates under strict constitutional obligations. Forcing a defendant to enter a plea or proceed with a hearing without their lawyer present violates fundamental democratic rights to fair representation. The judge was faced with a documented flight risk who lacked legal representation. Under these exact parameters, the judge loses discretionary leeway. A temporary remand is legally mandated until the defense counsel can be present. The media labeled this procedural hold as oppression. The legal reality shows a judge strictly adhering to mandatory constitutional protections to ensure the defendant received a fair trial. If the courtroom proceedings were standard, we have to look outside the court to understand the media publisher's strategy and how they attempted to break the legal process. The first tactic is political framing. Months before the arrest, the publisher preemptively attempted to discredit the complainant by publishing articles baselessly labeling him an establishment puppet planted by the ruling political party. The public reaction to this framing was heavily critical. Audiences read the articles and recognized the journalistic overreach, leaving comments that demanded actionable solutions to corruption rather than fabricated political drama. When political framing fails, the publisher relies on institutional blackmail. This platform has a documented history of targeting and extorting judicial officers in order to force specific legal outcomes. In a previous case, the publisher initiated a targeted defamation campaign against a federal court judge. They accused the judge of weaponizing police in a 100 million naira extortion scheme. The records proved the scheme was actually perpetrated by a third party who used the judge's name without her knowledge. Despite possessing the bank statements proving the judge's innocence, the platform weaponized public outrage against her. They demonstrated a willingness to destroy reputations if it allowed them to control the narrative. That exact same pressure tactic was deployed in this cybercrime case. The publisher bypassed the courtroom entirely and attempted to blackmail the Inspector General of Police, leveraging their media reach to secure the defendant's release. These actions do not meet the definition of journalism. They form a repeatable, extrajudicial playbook engineered to subvert the legal system through institutional intimidation. We now have two distinct frameworks for this case: the factual, statutory timeline of due process and the chaotic, manipulative campaign orchestrated by the media publisher. When tested against the text of the Cybercrimes Act and the basic procedural rules of a courtroom, the media's narrative of illegal state oppression collapses entirely. A pretrial remand for an unrepresented flight risk is not a political conspiracy. It is the literal definition of due process working exactly as it was designed to. This case highlights a broader vulnerability in society. Public perception is easily hijacked by bad faith actors who deliberately conflate standard criminal accountability with political persecution to generate clicks. The Cybercrimes Act exists to establish objective, firm boundaries for digital conduct. Those boundaries apply equally to everyone, regardless of an influencer's public popularity or their connections to powerful media platforms. True justice relies on a public that understands the technical mechanics of the law. When audiences demand verifiable facts over manufactured outrage, they render themselves immune to journalistic manipulation and the rule of noise.